All right, welcome everybody to the special council meeting regarding the 2025 budget. Here we are, Monday, October 28th, 6:30 p.m. at the WC O'Neill Arena Complex Chambers. This is also being streamed through Zoom and Facebook. If anyone has any questions particular to tonight's agenda or the budget conversation, please email to pnopper@townofstandrews.ca. Let's jump right into the purpose of the meeting. First, we'll note that all members of council are here, including Councillor Blanchard, and he's joining us virtually. And I do want to recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Peskotomuhkati people. Approval of the agenda. I'll be looking for a motion for someone to approve the agenda, which is just the budget itself, the conversation. Councillor Heenan, seconded by a couple Deputy Mayor Akaji. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. That's everybody. Disclosure of conflict of interest. Anything pops up this evening, since it's a budget conversation, just declare it at that time. There is no presentation, so let's just jump right into the introduction, consideration, passing of bylaws and motions. It is the discussion of the Town of St. Andrews 2025 budget draft number 3, FA 241026. Before we get into, I guess, the meat, I know that I think it was either Chris or Paul sent out kind of some of the things we talked about this morning. Was it Chris or Paul? I don't recall. One of you emailed it. It was Paul. Just some of the things I wanted to discuss with you this evening. The first is Councillor Ware. I know that you've definitely done a good job of expressing concerns over the model that we've received from the province of New Brunswick and regarding the way in which municipal reform and the taxation model is proposed. And there is a lot of merit in the fact that some of the buckets I don't think are properly allocated. I think we'd have to go through them all and determine which ones are which way for one ward over which way for the other. There'd be a little bit of subjective opinion that would have to be given to it to try to make it better. I completely agree that it could get to another level and definitely allocate to the right ward better on certain services. You're right. I guess my only question is for council, if we're going to undertake that activity, and I'm not saying that we don't, my only question that comes out of it is, what do we do with what we found, right? So like, if we're going to do that exercise, is it because we're prepared for everybody to pay what that model says, or are we still under the philosophy that we're going to be one community? And although that's the proposed model for the province, and we do have to obviously find some more common ground on those differences, but I was under the impression that this council did not want to get to the point where every ward was going to be paying exactly what every ward was supposed to be paying, and that we were going to try to find a common ground somewhere where everybody could live in. So I do completely acknowledge that the model from the province that we received needs to be dissected more, not just in St. Andrews, but it could be done across every particular municipality all across this province. But this has come up a couple times, and I want to be I want to address it. So I guess my question is if we're doing this, what is the result that comes out of it? Right. That's just my only question. Councillor Way, I don't know if you want to or any other member of council wants to, but myself, I did not think we were going to charge every ward exactly what that model said. So the floor is open. Councillor Harlan.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. That was my understanding as well. When we went through our first budget process last year as an amalgamated region or municipality, I thought we as a council were moving toward, what's that? Oh, I thought we were moving toward coming to a common place where we would be looking at a budget that was for the municipality of St. Andrews, which included Shamcook and Bayside. Amalgamation has happened. There's no turning the clocks back. This is the road forward. And, you know, one of the reasons we are very fortunate in being able to be one of the first municipalities to review our municipal plan is so that we all create a common vision for St. Andrews, which includes the wards. So I'm not clear in terms of what that exercise would provide us. And I would be concerned that it could potentially be not in the favor of Shamcook or Bayside. And I think it negates the whole idea of us moving forward as an amalgamated municipality. So I am not in favor of it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Heenan?
Yes, your worship. I am total agreement with Councillor Harland. I really fear that if we do this exercise and we do it, we do it promptly, that it will come out to the negative for both the wards. I like the idea. We said it last year and we remain firm on it, that we are one county, we are one town, and Bayside and Shamcook are included with us. So I'm total agreement. I'm not for diving into it. Thank you, your worship.
Anyone else? Councillor Ware?
Well, after those two comments, I have to speak, I guess, even though I didn't intend to. I can't see how we can have one rate for the 3 wards. The 2 wards outside the old town don't get near the services. And Section 99 sub 9 is my recollection of the Local Governance Act clearly states that if one ward is not getting the same services as another, then there should be an adjustment in the rate. So the provincial model says nothing about there being one common rate. The other thing is, as I said at the last meeting, we were given a budget first year and everyone agreed it was probably not correct, but we've used it as the basis of going forward every year and have not changed one thing from the way the original calculations were done. Overall, we've adjusted small things. And I look at the industrial park. They pay over $250,000 in taxes, those private businesses. What do they get for being a member of the town of St. Andrews that they weren't getting before? You know, paid for the fire service. They don't get police service. Police didn't know what was down there until about 10 years ago. Staff sergeant come down and said, all the officers have been mentioning this light in the sky down here. So he said, I come down to see what's down here. You know, they never drive down the road or anything. Yes, they get a 911 call to come. Vandalism, theft is a serious problem there. But yet those companies are paying $250,000 in tax, and that's an estimate based on my quick review of the assessment rolls. So I think the Act clearly states that there can be different rates, and we are not a homogeneous group by any stretch of the imagination. Even we might be in our minds, physically and financially we're not. So I'm not saying that we have to delve into it and do it in its entirety, but it's something that we should be aware of and try to make not exact decisions, but attempt to do a reasonable allocation of costs. And I pointed out a couple of costs that I didn't think there was reasonable allocation. I don't think anybody can debate that with me. They might try, but that would be about as far as it would go. Would it be to our detriment to do it? It's our detriment, fine. We've always paid our fair share. Comment was made about the garbage, that suddenly St. Andrews was subsidizing the garbage. Well, Councillor Bennett can comment on the exact numbers of how much Bayside and Shamcook have subsidized the other LSDs for the last 20 years. So we might be getting down around where we should have been paying all along. I don't know. But you know, we know what it's like to subsidize. And I was hoping that some of that would would cease to exist. I know it's not going to cease to exist entirely, and we can't devote someone's entire time to getting the departmental costs right, or the buckets as they're referred to. But I think there's 2 or 3 things that makes a community one. One is the culture. One is the way everybody interacts with each other. And we're a fairly homogeneous group in that respect. But the financial aspects of the 3 entities are definitely different. That's all I can say on it.
No, thank you for that, Councilor Ware, and you brought up a lot of good points. There is no rule that says we have to have 1 mill rate. We're allowed to have variable tax rates for each ward. A lot of municipalities, not just in New Brunswick, but you know, across Canada have variable tax rates because there is different services that they receive. I guess my follow-up to that would be to do this exercise and to properly allocate the buckets, we'll call them, where this is what Shamcook Bayside should be paying, this is what the old St. Andrews should be paying. Is your expectation out of that we'll have variable tax rates and whatever that model says is what everybody should be paying? Is that what you're proposing? Or do you think that if that model says that it's this and that, should it 1 ward, no matter if it's Shamcook or Bayside offsetting St. Andrews or St. Andrews offsetting Shamcook Bayside, are you saying that that shouldn't happen and that we should pay for exactly the services received? Because it can't be a one-way street. That's got to be a 2-way street, meaning if one service is going to be subsidized, we're going to argue it, then we're going to have to argue other services that are, you know what I mean? It's got to be a complete model. This is an important conversation. I know you brought it forward, so I really want to get it all out on the table today so we can move forward. But I wanted to get that perspective. Is that what you're proposing, is we figure out what the variable tax rates are and that's what people pay?
Well, I'm not proposing anything other than we have to face economic reality, and we have to get the numbers as reasonably close as we can. We're never going to get them perfect. I've lived in that world in excess of 50 years, so I know that, you know, rarely are the numbers perfect. But I think to completely ignore it is fiscally irresponsible, I guess the word I would use for it. And so that's just my thoughts on it.
And I appreciate, because there's a lot of good points from the get-go that I agree that you brought up. It's just, what is the outcome of that exercise is what concerns me, because we're not just going to do that for fun. We're going to do it because there's a result that we want to implement, right? Councillor Bennett, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council, and thank you, Councillor Weir. I really appreciate the fact that you're standing up for the citizens in the outlying wards. I think it was clear from our session at the Bayside Hall a couple of weeks ago that there are many citizens that have a more than healthy concern over what's going on with our taxes, the level of taxes, and what services we're paying for. I still think that there's a whole lot of education that people need to know what we're paying for and what we're expected to pay for in this new community. And Councillor Weir brings up a good point that knowing that what we're paying for is very valuable. And right now, the points that Councillor Weir brought up about how those buckets for the town water and public works is grossly underestimated in the formulas, certainly puts to question if the taxation that the outlying wards are being charged is fair and reasonable or not. And I don't see how reviewing those costs puts a gun to our heads and worry that we might have to pay more. I don't understand how one thing has to do with the other. We're already taxed right now for this current year at one level. We don't know what next year is going to come because we're not finished the exercise yet. But it certainly would only legitimize the whole process of knowing and understanding what level of taxation we're at and what's fair and reasonable if we carry out the exercise and find out what those true costs should really mean. The town is benefiting from a lot of extra taxes from the outlying wards. And obviously the outlying wards are receiving the benefits of joining the community as well. I'm not trying to say it's only one way. You know, it's like the Councillor Weir said, it's our harmonious relationship that we're supposed to be having here. And I don't see how looking at the numbers to know what's fair and reasonable ties us to one direction or another. It seems like it should be just a simple thing to say, hey, this is what we've looked at it, we've researched it, we've looked at the numbers, you know, and we really think that Bayside and Shamcook is getting a fair shake, you know, and here's the numbers that we came up with from people who are experienced in accounting procedures. It seems like that should be a very fair and reasonable thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Do a second round here. Just is there anyone that wanted to add that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Okay, we'll do a second round.
Thank you. So I just need clarification on the number of buckets we are talking about. Like, are we talking about a couple of areas where there are significant questions around how the calculations have been made? Or is this is the exercise that is being considered a line by line of, I mean, we have seen a number of budgets with a number of lines. Like, I guess the clarification that I need, so that, to your point, Councillor Bennett, so that residents of Shamcook and Bayside can feel reassured that whatever mill rate we come up with, and the mill rate has not been decided, and it hasn't been determined that it will be one mill rate for St. Andrews, that hasn't been discussed, or a decision hasn't been made around that. But I just need clarification. Are we talking about a couple of things that have been identified, Daryl, either by you or by Mr. Spear, where there might be some discrepancy?
I guess to answer that, Mr. Veer, you can, but I would say that at that point, we would probably grab the budget and go line for line almost. And if everybody says, no, let's keep going, we keep going. Otherwise, if we have a concern, one ward over another, because there will be some. For example, we went from 3 police officers to 5 as a community, right? So as a community, that's basically 40% of our officers are, in theory, because Shamcook Bayside has joined the municipality, right? Shamcook Bayside is about 33% roughly of the tax base. So again, that's a situation where St. Andrews might be offsetting Shamcook Bayside as a result of paying more taxes and bigger tax base. So that's an example one way. The other way is the example of, let's just say, administration. There might be positions that Councillor Ware has identified that they're really not providing a whole lot, not saying none, but not as much benefit to Shamcook Bayside. And Shamcook Bayside is now paying, in theory, with that model, a third, right? So it would be going through line by line. We wouldn't go to staff position in a public setting, because that would be a little bit, you're talking about staff then. But we would go line by line and we would determine, is this something that should be with the provincial model, or is this something that we should deviate away from, right? We can't stop reform. Reform has happened. We all know that. We all know that there's a model the province give us, but Councillor Ware's main point is that we call them buckets, but there's certain things that Shamcook Bayside is paying for today that they shouldn't be paying for because the services are not in Shamcook Bayside. They're not arguing the wharf. They're not arguing the arena. Those are all shared assets, but it's actually positions and water and stuff that doesn't benefit. So we would have to go line by line. It would not be perfect, because like Mr. Spear, for example, would have to tell us how much time he believes Shamcook Bayside is like, it wouldn't be perfect, but you could do a little bit better of a job of allocating certain costs than what was originally cascaded by the province, which was all based on it was all percentage wise based on the tax base is what it was. So it could be a few items. It could be 30, it could be 40. Like it all depends. We would have some things like the garbage that would have to be discussed. I understand. I totally agree. Shamcook Bayside was offsetting because of the tax base a lot of the other rural areas. But when we renegotiate our contract as a whole, Shamcook Bayside went down substantially and St. Andrews went up. So that's because the rural area, for whatever reason, because the houses are spread out, they don't have as good of a contract traditionally anywhere, not just here, but any of them. They cost more for some reason, which Bayside I don't understand because the truck drives by Bayside to get to us. But that anyway, that's but so we would have to go through all that. We would have to figure out some type of model. But and I'm okay doing that. I guess if that's your baseline for future conversations, it would be good to have that. I agree. It's just if we're worried about one ward offsetting another ward, and when that comes out, then the other ward that's offsetting should be concerned about it, right? If that's the purpose of it, then that we don't want one ward offsetting another, then we got to be prepared for what that says is my only point. Yeah, Councilor Ware.
If I could ask permission to speak a third time? In no way did I imply we should get through anything line by line. There's just a couple of departments that the rest we pay for. That's provincial legislation. I haven't been on the wharf in 10 years, but I'm paying my taxes on the wharf. No, it's longer than that. Well, when BB was there anyway. But I think there's 2 or 3 departments that we should look at what Mr. Spear and I would refer to as material items and determine if they're being treated fairly. And material items is just a term that accountants use, just means the big ones. But so no, line by line is it's unreasonably time consuming, particularly at the council level. So I was only speaking to the 2 departments that are outside the wards and any interdepartmental charges that would be going through them, that they at least be reasonable. Saying exact, we'll never get them exact. I can guarantee that. So, it's that's fact of life.
Councilor Bennett.
Thank you, Your Worship. And maybe I can make a suggestion here that can help us all, especially in the name of cooperation. I'd feel quite comfortable with, especially with Councillor Weir's expertise in accounting, if maybe he could meet with the CAO and 2 accountants put their heads together and they can look at these numbers independently and come back and report to us on their findings. I'd feel very comfortable with those 2 people with their experience looking at the numbers and giving us a report on what they found. If you'd be willing to do that, the 2 of you. Just seems like we have a very good situation here, having 2 accountants in the room, and who better to look at numbers than bean counters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bennett. I'm fine with the 2 buckets, but if we're going to do this exercise, we got to do all of them. Like, it can't be just the 2 that we select. The reality is, if we're looking at, water or whatever, what's being offset, we've got to look at police services. We have to look at the fact that in St. Andrews, the old ward, that the garbage collection has gone up significantly. So if we're going to look at one, you got to look at the ones that are going to hurt you too, right? And it's unfortunate, but it goes both ways is where I'm getting at here. And we can't just pick the 2 that want to be talked about. We got to pick all the ones where we think the allocations of taxation are not what they should be, that are all impacted by it. So that's just my only point. Maybe we don't have to go line for line, but everyone look at the budget and say, put an X beside them and say, dive into that, right? I'm fine with that, but it just can't be the 2 that we think Shamcook and Bayside are at a disadvantage at. It's got to be for every single ward at this table if we're doing 2. Councillor Heenan. Oh, Mark set his hand up. Go ahead. We'll go to Mark and then we'll go to you, Councillor Heenan.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, Brad. I was just going to say the exact same thing you said. The exact same thing you said. Actually, we can't just restrict it or limit it to 1 or 2 things. What happens about all the others? They might be smaller offsets, but they add up. So I just don't think it's a fair exercise if we're doing it just part way. And yeah. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Councillor Heenan.
Yes, Your Worship. I like the bucket theory. But my point is, what happens if the wards use more of the bucket next year? Are we going to have to look at line for everything and then say, oh, well, Bayside's got to pay more because they use more of the bucket. Like, a family's a family. And harmoniously, or whatever you want to call it, like, if we're going to do 2 buckets, I would say we're doing all the buckets. So I'm not just going to pick and choose 2. There's a two-way street, and we have to do it fairly. So if the decision of council is to look at line for line, then we have to do every one of them. We can't just pick 2 or 3. Thank you.
Councillor Hurdle, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if we move forward with this, and I don't think that we should, but I think that it should be done as a motion of council first. And second, again, kind of echoing what you said, I don't think we can pick the ones that, not disagreeing with you. I think that there are some inequalities there, but I think if we do pick the ones that don't work in favor of Bayside and Shamcook, we also have to look at the ones that go the other way as well, because my fear is that Bayside and Shamcook, as a result of this, and this will take a lot of time and paid employee time to do this too, Bayside and Shamcook will end up paying more, and I don't want to see that.
All right, it does make sense. This should be a motion of council, just so there's clear direction. That I agree with. So council, some healthy debate. It's not an easy debate, to be honest. A lot of this conversation that we're having, not to look back, but that's what I thought the facilitator would have done when we went through municipal reform, is they would have said, this is what it looks like, and this is your multi-year plan to get together as one community, but we know that didn't happen, right? So now we're stuck, like we talked about, neighbor versus neighbor, ward versus ward, saying, you know, this and that. I was hoping that, to the point is, we don't know what the future bodes for future councils. We have 2 budgets to pass, and we're not going to get to the end game. We know that, right? We're not going to get the end game. So Councillor Ware's exercise would be a better baseline for future councils to make decisions. And what that is won't be up to all of us. Some of us maybe, but not all of us. So there is some merit in that exercise, to Councillor Bennett's point. But it's just, I think I'm hearing from a number of councillors, it can be those 2 buckets, but any bucket that we think is offsetting an award has to be done. I just worry that whatever comes out of this, if we're going to do this exercise, we're going to update it every single year, because it does change every year. That's a true fact. Things change, contracts go up and down. Every year, this will be an exercise that we do. So I almost feel like what we're almost doing with this exercise is we are going to get to a variable tax rate, which might be what we always had to get to in the first place. We're in my head, I was hoping to have it all one, so we don't do this, but in fairness, it's probably not the best system having one tax rate. But what I'm afraid of is if you're doing this exercise every single year, the council of the day is going to do this exercise and see Shamcook Bayside is supposed to be higher. And what it's going to end up doing at the end of this exercise is put the taxes up higher in Shamcook Bayside as a result of doing this exercise. That's my fear, because this isn't a one and done. This is a moving, living document that every year will have adjustments. So if a council 6 years from now is still doing this exercise, then it's going to spit out that Shamcook Bayside should be paying this, St. Andrews, the old ward, should be paying that. And it's just going to keep lingering, and we're never going to become one. But maybe to that point, maybe you never do. Maybe Mr. Spear, I don't know if you can talk. Is there municipalities that do this exercise every year, and that's what they pay? And municipalities that have gone through reform a lot, I guess you could say, further back than we obviously are.
Well, Your Worship, I guess, honestly, I just put an email earlier today to a few of our associates around the province, but everyone's in the same boat that way, right? That locally, so it'd be kind of going outside the province to talk to Nova Scotia, Ontario, or somebody where they've had this, and to see how they're allocating. We've had some loose conversations at some meetings and stuff, but we didn't get into finite numbers. I think it's fair to say, even prior to amalgamation, for some municipalities that had variable tax rates, we'll say the outside rate was always lower than the inside rate, is what they tended to say in the day. And so there's some merit to that. I don't know if there's a science behind it or just political will, to be honest. I can do some research on this and see kind of how it's handled in other jurisdictions, but I think there's several places that are the same. And I mean, like I was talking to Hampton, I think they have 8 tax rates that they have to play with up there. St. George, Eastern Charlotte, sorry, has 4 or 5, I think, not more. So it's we're all going through this at the same pace and trying to figure it out. So I am trying to get a few opinions to see what people are talking about, or if it's just kind of mixing and matching what they feel is fair without coming up with a real mathematical formulary based on it. But if you could leave it with me for a couple of weeks, then maybe I can have a look and get some more information together and get back to council.
And just on that, that'd be really good to see what other places are doing. We're not the only, this isn't a unique St. Andrews challenge. Any municipality that had LSDs join it, or even two different communities for that matter, probably is experiencing the exact same thing that we are. They had the same model, they have the same flaws, same benefits, but same flaws. That makes a lot of sense to me. And the reality is, for setting the budget for this year, we already know it's not going to go up to 20. Like it really doesn't have a major bearing on this year, but to see what other municipalities are doing, there's value. I would like to not leave this though. This is an important topic because first of all, a couple councillors feel very passionate about it, but this is about how the community moves together as one through a very difficult and incomplete municipal reform process. And then we don't even begin into a whole lot of things that we're still waiting as well for tax reform, obviously, fiscal reform for municipalities. That could throw a whole other variable in this over the next year. The whole government, when they were running, did promise that they were going to address it. They're going to address it fairly quickly as well, as what they promised, with an interim measure, is what Councillor Neal and I heard when we went to the UMB session in Fredericton. We went both to those. So there's going to be some other variables in this, but I think there's merit in having this conversation. I think there's merit in not just letting it fall aside. Otherwise, we're going to be here next year doing the exact same thing. So but I would like to hear back to hear how other municipalities are dealing with the same challenges that we do. Councillor Ware.
Abuse my rights once more.
It's a conversation, right? It's not like a motion with debate. It's a conversation.
No, at no time did I feel we had to solve the problem this year. I just think it's something that exists that has to be on the list of something to deal with. And maybe I won't even be around when it's finally comes to a point where everybody's comfortable with it. After all, I did turn 74 yesterday. I've been in my profession for 55 years. So, you know, been at this stuff a while, and it doesn't happen overnight. I don't know how many years it'll take, but I do know there's, just from my professional experience, there's some items that have to be on the table, and they have to be solved in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And unless we get them on the table, recognize that they're there, then they'll never be solved. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Ware. Does everyone feel that hearing back will be the next step? Again, it does have bearing, but it doesn't have bearing on this year because we know we're not going to get to that finish line. We have a basis because of the shared services that Shamcook Bayside now have to pay that they did not have to pay for before. We kind of know that it obviously has impact on the numbers, but for future councils, having the correct, I'll call it a data set almost, but correct accounting buckets would be very valuable if they're continuing to follow this model, right? All right, that was a healthy conversation. I know it took a while, but we have talked about it a couple of times. I wanted to give it obviously some time for everybody to weigh in, and thank you, council, for obviously discussing that and obviously debating. Sometimes the taxation conversations get heated, and the fact that it was done in such a respectful manner. Again, a difficult conversation that we've inherited, but we'll continue to work together. Don't always have to agree, but the basis is respect and hearing other people's positions. I think we'll be just fine. Mr. Spear, I'll pass it over to you now, but I want to address that one first. And then before we're getting into some of the grant requests we have, I just have a few words I'd like to say before that one as well.
Yeah, so council, we are going to back up. If we're starting to go through the capital, the last time we met together on budget, so we're just going to pick up about 3/4 of the way through the slide on there to discuss on the utility budget, just about slide 83, Paul. Or 23, sorry. Yeah, 83 is my, yeah, 20s. There we go. All right, so if you want to go to the next slide. So currently, just there's about $23 million of assets, but that's original cost. And just so you know, there's lines that were put in there for about $1,000 a block that are now probably $300,000 a block. So the actual value of replacement's probably closer to 100 million these days. Next slide, please. I won't go through all the. So under, that slide's is out of order. That's my fault. So long-term debt that we were going currently is we got about $3.5 million at the end of last year. We had no plans to take any additional debt this year. We're just financing everything through the reserve funds and from the revenue of the utility fund. So at the end of this year, we'll have about $3.3 million in outstanding debt, which is roughly about 40%, if I remember, top of my head, the debt servicing level, which is getting up there, but is normal for utilities, which are capital intensive, have a lot of assets, not a lot of operational cost. Next slide, please. So in 2024, we're just completing two big things. Upgrades to the water treatment plants. We had to replace a strainer. If you remember, one broke midway last year. We went early in the year, and that's actually going to be starting the next couple of weeks. And then we have just a meter replacement program for 40,000. So that's not new stuff. That's stuff we're currently in. Next, please. So some of the projects we're proposing for next year is Champlain Avenue. So that goes from Acadia down, actually Cemetery, towards the end of the road along the dirt road past the museum. That's about 858,000 for in ground. Prince of Wales is 505,000. That's in poor shape. Main breaks up and above the Algonquin. Harriet Street, this has been on the thing for a couple of 3 years. That goes between Queen and Water Street. It was up there as part of that project. As you know, we've been taking around with that area for 2 or 3 years. We keep just doing little segments. Carlton Street is because of the Algonquin project. Before they put in the new building and do all that renovations, we better replace a line that's severely old, the extra pressures and stuff they're going to be doing. The water treatment facility, we have the program there, 50,000. Then some security cameras there. Scales, the rest of the stuff, parts for the chlorine system, 10,000. Upgrade the alarm system for SCADA, 7,500. We've been doing that in pieces as well. We've done some this year on that already. If you remember, we had that incident earlier in this year where the whole town went on boil order because of that. So we're trying to ensure that at least that never happens again for that reason. System flow meters have to be part of our testing process for 10,000. The water treatment plant needs ballast. So as you know, most of it's under ultraviolet. So we just want to go in a cycle. I forget I think there's like 60 bulbs that have to be replaced. These are about 10. Yeah, 30 per unit. So there's a ton of them. The Douglas Street lift station has to be repaired for 7,000. There's a pump and then there's a valve to replace. So there's about $2 million, $2.1 million up for consideration that council's brought before you. Not all of them are necessary, but all are important. The system had been under refurbished or undercapitalized for several decades. So now we're trying to play catch up. And we have been for years. Okay, keep going down. If you want to flip back up, that funding, yeah, that got out of order.
Can I just ask a quick question about a line item there?
Yeah.
Or should we wait to the end to ask questions?
Yeah.
I just see a line item for 55,000 to trim trees.
Oh, right, sorry. That's
Can you
an
just
important one.
give me a little more detail on that one? That just seems like a lot of money for a trimmed tree.
So what the problem, well, not the problem, the reality is that from the Harkness Road water treatment plant all the way to the towers here, it's all through woods. It's not through the roads, and it's basically overgrown. And right now, that if there was an incident there, it would almost be impossible to get to it. So this is just preventative maintenance. Those lines have been replaced for decades, so we have concerns. Terry says in an ideal world, that we'd invest in the next 4 or 5 years and run lines up the highway instead of through the woods. But right now it's to be to make sure we have access to our water line, which is growing in. The other problem is true, as the trees grow, they also impose a threat to the lines because the roots can go through them essentially. They're quite a ways down there, but if you get a mature tree, those lines are probably put in 40, 50 years ago, to the best of my recollection, if not that. So they're probably very mature trees at this point in time.
Thank you.
Any of those line items addressed some of the smell that we're getting these days? When we had the Indigenous evening, it was very, very bad at the point.
But we think this smells from the clam beds, not from the sewer
Okay,
lagoon.
because all I
It's low
know,
tides. We notice it. I know what you mean, but you notice it all over town certain days,
yeah,
and it's always at low tide.
but it was bad that night, if I'm not correct, am I correct on that, Deputy Mayor? Yeah, and it was, and I was just concerned, and a lot of people mentioned it like to
Yeah.
me, and I just wanted to make sure that, well, we know we're aware of it, but I didn't know if any of those line items took care of that or not. But anyway, thank you.
I mean, most of the stuff that goes through our sewer system, to be honest, is water coming from the combined system. That there's only a small fragment of it that's actually waste. Just the way, and that's typical for older municipalities when they combined storm drains and everything right into the sewer system. So we jump back up. So for funding for this year, this is what we're proposing for now, is that there should be about $330,000 from utility revenue towards capital. Borrowing of $895,000, which is significant. A little bit off a capital reserve, which is to kind of balance it out. But a big part of it right now is I'm proposing that we go out actively once you propose that you okay the budget, that we put in applications to look for 40% funding for the projects. We haven't had a utility project for years that's been funded as we've gone through other ways, and I'm hoping that we can get through Infrastructure Canada or whatever, try to get that, or so they get new grant funds that have come out and stuff, and to try to offset some of that cost. If that's not there, there'll be a different discussion after Christmas if we get a letter of rejection, but I'm kind of counting on it right now.
Mr. Spear, I know you have a slide there. So what does 895,000 do to our debt ratio that we can go to what, 40%? How close are we getting here?
Okay, if we go down, Paul, yeah.
I saw you scroll down, but that's the big question here. Like what's,
So I was wrong, sorry. We're currently around between 20 and 30%. If we do some of the projects we're proposing by 2027, we'll be closer, if not slightly above the 50% ratio, which is more than they really want you to be. But again, anything beyond this year is just letting you know it should be done. Nothing in that far out is necessarily emergency, but at this point in time.
and you're projecting, and sorry, I can't see it because I didn't bring my glasses, 2027 and for it to start going down in 2028, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that because something's getting paid off?
Yes, so the older projects that are, that we did.
That big
15.
refurbishment for, that'd be done in that year?
Well, yeah, that's right. The debts is going down at that level.
Sorry, your worship, just note for future for council is one of the major water and infrastructure projects that's going to come is the water tower. We know that's within 5 years that we'd want to bring that forward and get that replaced. And also to note that when you're looking at the utility capital budget, when you're making decisions on projects, if they're associated with a road, that if you don't do that project, we're not going to do that road, just so that we're not damaging infrastructure and spending money to replace something that was just replaced.
That should be the next slide.
Sorry. Jumping ahead on you.
So, and there's actually within the papers I handed out earlier, this is just showing what's there. So within infrastructure projects, there's two components. As you know, by law, we have to have things under the general fund, general capital, which is paid by tax revenue, and the utility revenue. And so overall, the total cost of these in-ground infrastructure projects is a little over $2 million, well, 2.1 million. 1.9 million, we'll say, is for in-ground, and about 224,000 is to repave above. Those are the costs. So if I combine these here just to show you that if you decide to cut one of those projects, that there'd be a total savings of there. Talking to Terry earlier, he had to leave sick today, so otherwise he would have been here. But he said that Carlton Street and Champlain Avenue would be the top two.
And just to dive into Champlain Avenue, Councillor Bennett and I were having a good conversation before the meeting. Is this just the section that's not paved?
Correct.
So there's 6 homes there. Are we legally have an option of, and I'm sorry if anyone that lives in those homes, but these are questions related to financials for the town. Is there a way in which we can offer wells? Because even if you paid $30,000 per well and put 6 wells in, it's $180,000 versus you wouldn't have to redo the road. It's not a high traffic road. Is there a legal way in which you could do that? Or is that something through the Minister of Local Government that you're not allowed once they're on the service?
No, well, you have to get permission from the Minister of Local Government to do it, or Minister of Local Government or Minister of Health. I think it's the Minister of Health, actually, because we tried this somewhere else a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's a Minister of Health, because waterways are under that jurisdiction.
Okay.
And so that's possible. We've talked about that in the past. There's discussion, debate among staff, which is the better way to go. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I will say, though, that a well, when I dug mine 15, 20 years ago, it was 20,000. So if we can get 30,000 for a well, we'd be lucky. But because we discussed this about a year ago, but at the same time, we talked about doing that, but there's concerns. Then if we put who's going to be responsible for the pumps, what if some of them aren't accessible by well? Because there's been questions of salinity in the water down there. But having said that, I know that Katie's Cove Inc. dug a well, but they don't recommend to drink it. I don't know if it's anything bad with it, but it's primarily for use of the washrooms. So there's questions back and forth. I wouldn't disagree, but you're putting a lot of onus on those particular users, but it's the same thing. There's more homes than that. I think there's 10, especially if you take in consideration undeveloped lots that could be developed in the future.
And I am sorry for those homeowners, but even if it's $40,000 and it costs $250,000 versus $1 million, paying $1,200 a year in water bills is never going to pay this back. And unfortunately, sometimes you got to look at things like a business and say that this investment is going to, in part of a community, you offset everybody, so we're all part, but it's no different than when we looked at it in Shamcook at the time. It just doesn't make financial sense if you can find an alternative that costs you 1/4 of the price when we're seeing our debt ratio is hitting almost 50%. I don't like being a bad cop, but if this is something we could legally look at and save $750,000 for the municipality, it's something I think we have to look at. Like, that's just my view. And yeah,
The whole, just so you know, there's going to have to be some costing because there's 2 or 3 homes between Champlain between Cemetery and Acadia. There's 2 homes, maybe 3 that are serviced by serviced by water and sewer, so they can't have a well. They'd have to be, so we'd have to do that part, and that's probably, I'm gonna say $200,000 or something just for that portion before you get over by the museum and extend it on the dirt road.
so with these factors that I don't know, would it be worth it to do an analysis to say this is what it would save us and then find out the feasibility? Because even if we save $400,000, if say this amount that I have in my head's getting smaller, or $300,000, that's a substantial amount. And if you're putting in all the cost of putting in a well for somebody, I know it's not the same, but doesn't cost the greater community $1 million. I think it has to be looked at.
We'll review it again, because
Yeah.
that was my plan, as we've been going back and forth as staff on this, that we talked about this. But we might have to dig deep, see if we can get an estimate on wells and maybe find out how good Katie's Cove pressure is and stuff. But it just, the risk is that maybe 2 or 3 of them are successful and 2 or 3 in them aren't, and then what do you do?
And then I guess my other question based on this is, or comments is, we're assuming with those debt ratios that we get no surprises and we're getting awfully close to the 50%. If we get a major surprise where a line fails us or something, and we don't have the ability to get the funding, what happens then? So the comment about going and getting the 40%, I think we have to have the 40% to do any of these projects. Or unfortunately, we have to gamble and hope that the asset holds, because at the amount that we need to do for the utility, one of two things has to happen. We either need some outside help, or we need to substantially increase the rates yet again. Because again, if you look at those financial projections, it is getting a little risky when you're that close to the max in case you do get a surprise. So I hate it because I pay a water bill, but the reality is the model future does not, and again, we're not alone. I know that this is infrastructure across towns and municipalities all across Canada, but the model right now is not a good model. So I think we need those 40% dollars. And again, the other thing that is coming is UMNB, and of course the government is looking at the fact that infrastructure all across New Brunswick has been so underfunded for so long that there's millions and millions of dollars worth of projects. There could be more money that is coming down the pipeline to help offset some of these water projects. I'd hate to go and take a bunch of debt out, and then in a year and a half, we find there's a new fund that we can tap into. And I know it's risk. So every year we defer projects, it's another year that you could have a major failure and it costs a lot more if all of a sudden you got to do emergency repairs. But I just don't like, and I know that staff's done a great job of showing the aging infrastructure, what needs to be done. I don't like getting the ratio that high for this municipality. It's dangerous. Like I hate to use that word, but it's dangerous in case something surprises you.
And your worship, I'll play a bad cop to your bad cop, but I think rates we're gonna have to have a hard review of the rates. That I know people are struggling of the users and stuff and have concerns, but we're still one of the, we're on the lower side of the average across New Brunswick. And even this model that I've put up before you, as I showed, I'm requiring 40% funding from the government. If we don't get that, it'd be a head scratcher. So we might only do, like, say, Carlton Street, just because of the proposed building going there, then have to sit on the rest till we figure something out. It's an exercise I'd like to do probably over the winter, just to, do a next 10-year model and see kind of where I think the rate should be. Part of the problem too, though, is waiting to see how our new consumption model works and run a couple of cycles with that to see what that looks like. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. But we'll go back, because we've had internally discussions on the Champlain Avenue one, and we'll see. Go back to that.
So with my rant over, sorry, it was Champlain and Carlton. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, if that's what you heard. Might be Prince of Wales and Carlton, but I think it's Champlain and Carlton. But I'll talk to Terry on next time I see him and provide a better update.
Mr. Spear, based on kind of some of the circles that you're obviously in with other CAOs and the promises that were made at the election, does it make sense, as much as we don't want to hold these off, does it make sense to see if there is a new pipeline of funding coming in? Because we were kind of promised that, and I know election promises don't always, but I was there, so was Councillor Neal. We were kind of promised that. So I'd like to see it come to reality, not to put the pressure on a new government, but they did say that they were going to even have an interim measure. And they also said that they're going to look at the funding model. I just hate to take all this debt and then find out a program's around the corner is my big concern here.
That's at the will of council. I can identify that. I think the one that's an absolute we need to do is the Carlton Street one. Even Champlain Avenue, we've been postponing it. It's, it's getting more breaks and stuff. So you always risk that over the winter something will happen to it. And it's an old asbestos concrete line, so it's always special care in dealing with those, and it's brittle and stuff. But again, we're not going to issue anything on it till the spring anyway, so we can have, by that time, we'll have the first budget, I'm assuming, and announcements from the Holt government. And so we'll be able to get a better idea of what's going on.
This slide is the bulk of the decisions you're hoping to have from council. I should open up the rest of council. I know I've shared a lot of views, but I think we're getting closer to the point where not necessarily the utility, but we can actually make projections on what the budget is. We can't say the mill rate, but we can determine how much we want our tax base to grow for operating. Like 3% is kind of the number that we talked about today. So like, even though we don't have all the data, we still could know what, our tax base as a community is going to be. This has nothing to do with the province. This we kind of know. The reality is the projections aren't good. So I don't see any reason why we can't have some conversation on this, council. If Carlton needs to be done, it's the smallest project. That doesn't, if it needs to be done, I don't want to, see Carlton without water. Champlain, I'd really like to see that analysis done, because for few houses, how much money is just, it's hard. And if you're a resident there that's hearing this, all I'm asking staff to do, and with council support, is just to look at it. That's all we're seeing, to see what the financial analysis is on it. Council, over to you. I know I've spoke a lot. Councilor Gumish, then we'll go Councilor Heenan after that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question for staff. Didn't we at one point have some 50-cent dollars for Prince of Wales under active transportation or something or other?
We did, but it's a different portion of Prince of Wales.
Your Worship, I'm just wondering, the sewerage on Champlain, is it on a sewer line? No, they all have their own septic tank?
Yeah, once you get to the the Oppenheimer Museum,
Yes.
and beyond that, they're all on their own septic system.
So right now, if I'm clear, there's water in the ground to these houses. Am I correct? That's kind of running on a shoestring?
Shoestring might be a little over exaggeration,
Yes.
but 3 shoestrings maybe.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's all I wanted. Thank you, Your Worship.
All right, council, what's your thoughts on kind of setting a budget? Staff's looking for direction here. What I'm hearing based on what Mr. Spear's saying is that the total of projects that they feel is more urgent, I would say Prince of Wales and Harriet, they said are not as urgent, right, as Champlain and Carlton. So based on the debt ratio, I hate to defer projects, but with funding around the corner, I think you take the other ones off the table until you hear more. But yeah, I guess I'm looking for some direction.
And Your Worship, just to push it back a little bit, from a standpoint of budgeting, really the capital stuff doesn't have to be decided now. St. Andrews always has, because it's easier in a smaller municipality, especially the utility, because it's independent of the tax base. Sorry, thoughts, I'm still in vacation mode. Independent of the tax base, that cutting or choosing. If you narrow it down to 2 or 3, we can have a discussion after Christmas to see exactly which projects we take on at that point. I just didn't want to beat this one to death when it's still up there. It'd be nice to have instructions to give engineers to have a look at it, but I just want to say anything you decide here isn't going to affect the tax base that much.
So those original ones you're talking about, the smaller, like kind of capital, or
Yeah.
you want direction on those too, or are you just looking for these big 4 buckets of these streets?
Well, why don't we say that Carlton Street is probably a strong yes? Then I'll have to double check between Prince of Wales and Champlain. I've forgotten which is more important, and then actually, I'm going to take it back. I think it's the Prince of Wales is more important because of the new spa going in. That line is old, and if they're going to be attaching that there, they probably should be replaced so everything's open.
Fair enough, but that's going to be at least a year build, so we're probably to 2 years. So we might have another look at that with the amount of time it would take.
And
I guess, but just to be clear on this, do you actually even have to submit this to the province, or could we just wait till we hear from funding and then we dive into it and we can just go to the capital borrowing board accordingly?
exactly.
So council, I don't know why we would lock anything in right now then. I think for the sake of a government just formed, we're better off waiting a couple months in the new year, picking this up and seeing what we hear. That makes sense to you, Mr. Spear? We now know about these projects, which is good, but
Mostly, but what would be good, well, there's 2 things though, I guess, is number 1, Municipal Capital Borrowing Board will have to make applications sooner than later because it takes a little bit. We also, because of the gas tax funding, have to identify projects before we're going to get that money. We have to submit a new plan in the next phase. So it'd be good to identify a couple of them.
by identifying them doesn't mean we necessarily have to do them, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Well, I think Carlton Street definitely would be the one that jumps out because it sounds like it's urgent. It's the smallest amount. And then I don't know, Champlain, we could go in for 60% of the cost and either look at wells or we're looking for other government funding, but it doesn't mean we have to do it. If we want to go to the capital borrowing board just for almost like a pre-authorized mortgage, then that's what that is. But it doesn't mean we have to do it, council. I'd like to revisit it based on what's available for funding. Like it's,
And that's fine, your worship.
yeah, and we've talked about, Mr. Spear and I have talked about this length. This is the one, since the moment I joined council, this is, when it comes to capital of utility, this is the thing that keeps me up the night the most because of the financial viability of the system.
But if, don't forget, your worship, that not only the financial liability, but you want to keep water flowing to all your residents. So it's an offset. We're not putting forward projects, improving stuff, you know, when
You don't want to
it's
gamble.
replacing old, yeah.
You don't want to gamble with people's water, but in the same sense, something's got to give here. At some point, the municipality is going to have to substantially increase these rates for water to be viable. The reality is having a municipal water source in any community costs a lot of money, and our water is coming a long way in from Shamcook. So the other disadvantage is we don't have an alternative. Yeah, this one is going to be something that councils for the next 20 years are going to have to wrestle with. It can't be solved overnight.
And your worship, I just wanted to touch on something just quick, because I mentioned the Algonquin twice, but these projects are surfacing a whole bunch of other places too. I just didn't want the people watching or thinking that we're just doing these projects for the Algonquin. It's just because of those projects that it's important to do them, but just these lines are servicing a whole bunch of other users throughout town.
It's true. I just wonder if the Regional Service Commission, which we pay into, has a grant writer. I think it might be time to ask the grant writer to come in, because that spa is an economic driver for the entire region. And this is infrastructure the municipality needs to make sure is upgraded. Maybe there is a fund that they can help us with, because I don't want to put it all on. We've got a limited staff too, but the Regional Service Commission, we pay in for that position. This is something I would call it not just infrastructure, it's economic development. So I think we should be tapping on it. We should be applying multiple places to try to get this funding.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Sorry, council, I had strong opinions on that one.
If there's anything else, you can turn that off, Paul. What's that? No, we're going back to operations right now. So council, just as a follow-up for anyone that might be watching is interested. So we got a letter from the local government last week, no, 2 weeks ago, before I went on vacation, that under their regulations or law, they couldn't put out anything related to the tax until the cabinet was sworn in. So the cabinet's being sworn in this weekend, if I remember, Thursday or Friday or Saturday. So hopefully by mid next week, we'll have the information so we can move forward from that. Then we have 30 days after that to submit our budget.
Thanks.
Well, submit operational budgets, correct.
Perfect. What's the next bucket you want to jump into?
Well, I guess maybe we'll start. So I'm going to be looking at two different things here. I guess we could go back to the operations if you're okay.
Yep.
And we can either start with kind of the changes I recommended in by each department, or the one that council will have the most impact on will probably be economic development. Maybe, like I said, I'm working on 2 or 3 here, but why don't we take a look at the budget that I prepared for this meeting, and then I had some of the boxes around. So on page 6 of 34, under the general government and admin, the one big item that was recently added was there's a opportunity to go through AIM, I think it was, I was typing this, yeah, which is the asset management group for the Maritimes, that if we contribute 40,000, they'll do a shoreline protection, which I think they 20,000. There, we just saved you 20,000. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just happened to do it at night. So 20,000, and then they'll do shoreline protection for all of the municipality, like Shamrock and Bayside as well, from what I understand.
And for this one, isn't there? So this study, last time that we did the study for shoreline kind of rising sea levels, it was paid for by who? We had a grant, right?
Yeah, Environmental Trust Fund, I believe.
Yeah, so
Is that
ETF.
Is that a grant that opens up again this year?
Knocking on wood, it does.
'Cause, like-
It's been consistently open every year.
So going through that is kind of plan A, is that safe to say?
Plan A is there. Plan B is the FCM has just launched a new climate action grant that we can apply for as well. Following shoreline protection, stormwater management, stuff like that. So there are two granting opportunities that we can apply for directly that I know of right now.
But two things, your worship, is I've heard the Environmental Trust Fund is actually going to be disbanded. And from my understanding is prior to the new recycling, that the money made from recycling was going into that. It's the way it's explained to me, is kind of above me. Now, since they have a new supplier taking that over, they've lost that funding. And so that may go. So the ETF new government, who knows, but that's the way it's explained to me. The second thing, just so you know, that the ETF has a limit of $50,000, I think it is. And so this $20,000 was 15%. So it's like $100,000 study, just so you're aware. So the ETF wouldn't cover it. And so if we go through that larger FCM, we've still got to come up with the $20,000 to offset it, just so you're aware. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I know more about this. So AIM has a project to which they've received grant funding for. What they're doing is creating affordable avenues for municipalities to tap into their project. So using their project folks, their program, it's a conglomerate of everybody who does asset management in Atlantic provinces. Normally the project is a $10,000 or it's a $10,000 to $15,000 project, and it goes over 2 years. We asked them if there's a possibility of accelerating that to a 1-year project, and that's where a $20,000 request came from them. So that would be our portion into that. So if we were to apply for grant funding through FCM or ETF, our portion of actually what we'd have to provide, it would be smaller. It might not cover the whole thing. If it was ETF, we would get it covered completely because they provide the $20,000 on behalf of the municipality. We would apply for the program. If it's FCM, they'll provide 60 or 70% of the funding. We would still have to top it up to like our portion of the 20,000, and the rest is being grant covered through AIM.
But it's FCM supporting AIM.
Not that I know of.
So who's paying the AIM portion?
Don't know. Through their grant funding portals. I don't know where they got it from, but
But nonetheless, to have Shamcook Bayside, it would do the entire community. To have the visibility on rising sea levels better, that's even $20,000. That's good spend based on consultants and things that we've experienced. How detailed does that get? I know we did it, but like, I'll give you an example. There's some residents on the Glebe Road that have brought in a significant amount of armor stone to protect their seawalls.
Mhm.
Would it take into account that?
they'll take into account riprap, everything from riprap to natural based infrastructure. So one of the grant applications we applied to a couple of years ago for the Indian Point Park was to do riprap, and it was natural infrastructure funding is what they called it through the federal government. We proposed to do some rip wrapping and tie it in with trees and other grasses and stuff to retain. They even said there wasn't enough natural infrastructure built into your plan to do so. So through the steps, their goal through AIM is to create natural shoreline protection mechanisms, including riprap, trees, and make sure it's all planned out. So what do private landowners need to do? What do public property owners need to do? And how do they integrate? And how do you work together? Is sort of the plan that we've proposed to them, and they actually like that as a driving forward, because they know municipalities don't own all the property. So whatever we do is going to impact whatever that's going to happen to the neighbors. So it would be a nice to have a plan that shows what could we do with natural infrastructure and riprap rock together to create and protect shorelines.
Thanks for that. Council, over to you, but I think that's something that should stay in. That's for Shamcook Bayside. That's tremendous value for that amount of money.
All right, moving on. The only other thing that's I consider a small one, but we increased professional development by $2,500 in this budget. More staff. Okay. In this version of the budget, if you flip to the next page under general revenues, I did lower the community and funding equalization grant, just based on the model that, again, the previous government had said, but they were reducing the equalization grant by 20%. year over year and to fund some of the new mandates, the RSC. So I just plugged it in. We'll find out more in the next couple of weeks about that, but just so you're aware, and hopefully it goes the other way. Sorry, I'm just looking at my old notes from nothing there. Okay, so really the next big one is all the asks for economic development. So on page 8. So there's several there, and I think I made notes within my write-up that there's 2 ways you could go line by line. Most of these organizations would like to have an idea, or you could just say there's approximately, I think 88 plus 15, so about $103,000 in grants. You can just set a upper limit of total assistance grants and discuss it later. But many of these, it'll make a big difference, I think, for them, but it also helps staff this way. And I'm just looking for council's direction and how this conversation should go, if you want to discuss them now, but we have to have some type of methodology to adjust it to a level so we can put it in the budget moving forward for all those grants under economic development, your worship.
Yeah, so that's the big list here that's on page 2, that you're talking about. Yeah, but the summary page 2 there. So council, I guess just in general, from presentations we have, I think it's important to note for council and for those people that are presenting that it's not intended to come across as a cross examination, but sometimes it certainly does feel that way for some of these organizations, and we're volunteer run community, and the amount of effort that some of these organizations do, and some that aren't, didn't request money, the community doesn't operate without them, and the fact that they are raising their hand to try to make our community a better place, it is greatly appreciated. I can completely understand the rising costs of everything. Every organization is struggling. It seems like sometimes grants are a lot less out there. And I don't think it's the intention of any member of council to come across that we're taking away from their efforts or their cause. And I think that there's been maybe a couple incidents where people kind of feel like, wow, I didn't kind of expect that. But the truth is that council, unfortunately, is going to have to, and you don't, but I think you're going to have to make some tough decisions here. Not all these organizations are going to be able to get the amount of funds they're looking for, and some of these organizations may not get any. And the fact that council may debate where money can go and where it shouldn't go doesn't mean that your organization or your presentation was not worthwhile. It's just to add this much incremental funding. It used to be the community for assistance grants only gave out about 20,000 a year. In the last couple of years, that is easily over doubled with helping other organizations. And now what we're seeing is it's gone up 6-7 times what that is now. So it's a substantial number. And I'm really sorry to community members that when this debate happens, have to experience that, because it isn't fair. They're coming to us as municipal leaders. We have a revenue source and they're hoping for help. So thank you for everything that they do before we kind of discuss this. I think it's important to get that out there. I've talked to a couple councillors and they were a little concerned about that. So I don't think anybody here takes away from anything that they've done, and we're so thankful to have them. But council, with that being said, we need to make some tough decisions here. There is organizations that a couple of us would like to fund, a couple of us unfortunately would like to fund as well. But the reality is this amount of money that we've been requested this year is a very, very high number for a municipality of 3,000 people to be funding. And the other thing is the word precedence comes because when you fund some of these organizations, they kind of rely on it. And when you don't do it the next year, it's a major budgetary gap for them. So with that being said, Mr. Spear was looking for direction. I don't know if we want to set a bucket of money and an amount, and then we have a subcommittee that makes recommendations based on that. Or if you want to go through line by line and merit, the unfortunate thing with municipal governments is it's a blessing, but it's also a curse we're very transparent in our conversations. It's being aired through CHGO, YouTube, you can catch it all. But the reality is sometimes when somebody has to speak against an organization, it comes across that they're not valuing that organization. And that's the really hard part about this for all of you. So sometimes having a committee that can sit around a table and say this, and bring the recommendations back, and people can write in to say, how come you didn't? But to argue against one of these organizations that are doing a lot, that are making our community a better place, it's tough for me to expect you to open up right now and start talking against these. I don't think it's fair, to be honest. You want to be transparent, but you also don't want to publicly put down an organization that is making this community a better place. So it's a tough place to be. Council, I'd like to know your thoughts, but I think you allocate a bucket of money and form a subcommittee and have some conversations and come back with a recommendation. Council, we could put the bucket in the budget, and then we can dive into this over the next, month or two and really find out what we want to do for that. And there's some organizations that may need to know sooner rather than later too. Councillor Harlan.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very supportive of us identifying the amount that we are going to consider in terms of community grants. I do want to echo what you were talking about, Mayor Henderson, in terms of the value that all of those organizations bring to our community. And for myself as a councillor, I found it very informative and enlightening to have the presentations. I did not know some of the ins and outs of some of the organizations that came and presented to us, and I found that very informative and quite somewhat overwhelming to know the extent of the work that's being done, because sometimes you're in your own bubble and you can't know everything about everything that's going on in the community. I do wonder though, do we want to look at this as a subcommittee, or can we discuss this at a staff meeting?
Over to staff.
As your worship mentioned earlier, for the sake of transparency, it's probably better to do it in the open, but because there's no decisions that are supposed to be made at the staff meeting, to
But
be
we
perfectly
could
honest.
bring a motion forward out of that, right?
Yeah.
Would be the workaround. You have a motion and then you just put the amounts, like it's like a working committee essentially. And then you vote on it. Because again, some of these organizations are at least not going to get the full amount. I think we all know that. And to go and say, hey, I don't think this organization can get this, I wouldn't want to put anyone in that situation. It's not fair. And again, we are transparent. We talk so much. We all get emails sometimes about what we say. It's just not fair to argue against an organization that's making our community a better place. Mr. Knopper.
Your worship, just something else for council to consider is these were requests over $5,000. You will still have requests that are going to come in for under $3,000. So when you're looking at your pot of money that you want to set aside, are you going to break it up? Are you going to keep it as one pot and divide it from that? Or are you going to separate it out and have your requests under 3,000 and your requests over 5,000? So normally speaking, we will put out the request for under $3,000 in January, reviewed in February, and hopefully they're approved in February or the beginning of March. Last round of this, it did go to council subcommittee. The committee met and brought a recommendation forward to council on those under $3,000. So you already have a methodology set that way if you wanted to use the same methodology going forward for the 5,000 and above.
The only gray area in all this is if I look at the archives, which is really the courthouse based on their presentation, and Katie's Cove, one could argue that those are tourism services as well. So the other ones primarily are for residents, so it should be out of the fund, but some of them you might be able to tap into the tourism accommodation levy. Not that it was supposed to be for operating, it was supposed to be for more infrastructure is what we were holding the money for, but it doesn't mean we've used it before. It doesn't mean you can't. So I guess to Mr. Knopper's comment, is it just one bucket we're going to do? So the other bucket was what, 23,000? What was it? 20? How much was it?
You budgeted last year 15,000 for
50, and then we
for
added
anything
all
under
the others.
3,000, and you had $24,000 to almost 45 in the 3 requests over 5,000 or over 3,000 that you had.
So sorry, adding the 15,000 plus the other was what was the total last year?
You were close to about $40,000.
40,000?
Yes, between the requests of under 3,000, the requests above 3,000, you were approximately $40,000 budgeted.
And just for perspective, without all those other organizations that we funded, 2 of these requests alone would total $40,000.
Correct.
So 45,000. So council, if you were to hold all things the same with kind of the mentality of a 3% tax, second here. Too many pops up. So 45. Yeah, it's 46,350, right? Council, what's your thoughts on setting this for knowing that there's a lot of need in the community setting?
Councillor Heenan has his hand
Oh,
up.
sorry. Thank you, Councillor Heenan. Thank you.
Your worship and staff, just wondering if it would be a fair ballpark that we would say 1/3 is for under 3,000 and 2/3 is for over the 5,000. Would that be about the breakdown of our buckets?
You mean moving forward or in the past?
Well, you said like last year, I believe you said 15,000 was for under the 3,000 and 24,000 was for over the 5,000.
Yeah.
So if you kind of look at that, it's like 1/3, 2/3.
It is,
No.
but the only thing I'd warn you is there's been a couple of new asks this year that
Yes.
it's gonna, so if you're just gonna top up those existing, it means a new ask aren't gonna have anything addressed, or you're gonna drop them by more, just to bring it forward. So
But
for
I would
instance,
just like
big
to-
brothers and big sisters never asked for money before, and they've had a significant ask this year.
But what I'm wondering is like, we're talking about one bucket of money. Councillor Harlan said that we were talking like we need to move forward with the bucket of money that we need to approve. This bucket has to have some division in it in order to make the work for the subcommittee or whoever a lot easier. Because if we say, well, we got $46,500, are we just going to say, well, we're just going to do under the 3,000s, or are we going to, like, we have to know how we're going to split it in order to make it work, because you can't just take 46,000 and do it in 2 different groups.
So when's our call for the other ones? Typically, I know they can submit anytime, but we have a
February.
main call in February.
Usually mid-January, we'll start putting calls out.
Mhm.
By the beginning of February, close by usually the second meeting in February, first meeting in March, you're making final
So
decisions.
safe to say last year, that's the 15,000 of this budget. So call that 15,500 based on that
That's right.
shared, right? So that would be, and to your point, that'd be about a third.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And
so I
that's
think
what,
I think it's a safe assumption to say that it'll be, if we set the budget for 45,000 and we spend 40,000, we're cutting those smaller grants.
That's what
right?
I'm
So I
saying.
think you do need to earmark, to your point, a portion for the smaller, which.
that's right.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment, just for
Thank
setting
you.
a number. It can be one budget, but we need to reserve some for those people.
For
that-
those folks in February.
They're asking for small, like, I'll give you an example, sure, Search and Rescue, right?
Mhm.
They're a great organization that really benefits this community. They ask for a smaller amount every year. To earmark it all for this wouldn't be fair to them, right? So we need to save some money for organizations like that. It's important to note though, like Dial-A-Ride would move from this bucket to the other bucket though now, right? When because they would have been in the 15,000, so it's not necessarily going to be 15,000 this year. A couple of them, VMES will probably have an additional, but that's the Albert McCoy. Does that fall from that as well? That's not included in that.
The
right?
majority of the funds that go to like the VMES home and school program, most of the time you've given about $2,000 from the Albert McCoy and 1,000 from the actual program. It's varied between what they've asked for, but it's usually between $2,000 and $3,000 every year that they request. Same with like St. Andrew's Arts Council, they'll come in and request, and you'll give $1,000 or $2,000 from the Albert McCoy fund to support them. But you've also allocated, or previous councils have also allocated funds from the community grant, depending on what programs, what are they offering, and it changes every year. So you guys, that's where your evaluation committee comes into play.
Just a quick show of hands. How many would like to sit on a committee that talked about these bucket of these items? I mean, like, if you're okay sitting it out, how many? Like how many would like to really be part of that conversation? Just a quick show of hands.
Your
So
worship.
I'm not
there's a-
saying that everyone necessarily has to, so we could form a committee based on this, go
was-
into town hall, I'll go into town hall, have a tough conversation, make a recommendation to council. Over to you, Mr. Spear.
I think there's a couple of big ones though that might be worth having discussion before now or later because it'll make it easier. There's two that are over $10,000.
Yeah, so do you want to do those tonight, or do you want to,
It's up to council, but
or is that something that, did we hear back from Big Brothers on what other municipalities are paying for? Because that was a key question in that presentation that I have my notes that.
So the answer is yes and no. So the answer is yes, they do receive funding periodically from Eastern Charlotte and St. Stephen. However, each year is different. Each year the request is slightly different, but each year it's really just dependent on what the municipality is willing to give. Some years they've given very little, some years they've given more, depending on what the
it's program
council-
based.
Is more usually over 5 figures though?
There was no determination on that.
That's the big jump there, right? Because what my understanding was from the presentation is we're offsetting a position almost, a 0.5 position. But what I'm not confident in is, does the other 0.5, is it being paid for another municipality, or is this part of their overall budget that they have, and we're just a municipality that has to pay for our share? That was the big one that jumped out for me from that, because I'm, again, not discrediting any of their effort and what they do. It's just, if one municipality is getting it subsidized by the overall organization, why do we have to pay for it if the other communities don't? That was the fundamental. Again, nothing to do with how great the program is, but just, it's got to be apples to apples of, yeah.
The other thing too, to consider, your worship, is that most other municipalities don't have a drop-in center for youth that they're already paying for, which we do in St. Andrews. And so Big Brother, Big Sisters is the de facto youth organization in other communities. And so overall, it's a big bucket item when you combine the two.
And this isn't necessarily a comment for Big Brothers. It could be for any, when you
Yep.
go in for an ask, it's usually your best case scenario, and you may actually need less to operate and find other ways to do it. So it's not necessarily always a take it or leave it, right? So council, I don't think we should get into the arguing all these items tonight. I think we form a committee and then we come back with recommendations for council. And if you really want to be on that committee, we'll make it for a time that's convenient for everyone. And then we'll come back. Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate your comments at the beginning of this discussion. I really appreciate that. This is an impossible situation I think we all find ourselves in. And none of us are questioning the validity and the squeeze all these organizations feel these days. I think we all know that volunteers are hard to come by, and volunteer organizations are definitely counting every penny that they absolutely have. My only hope, I guess, is if we do form a committee, that there's some way, and this could be challenging, to create a rubric where we score requests. For example, one of those things that, just as we were talking about a moment ago, would be, is there already services in place to do this? It would get, that would then be maybe a detracted score against the request, because I think that takes it out of just a decision we all have to make, and kind of just makes it a little more, I guess, mechanical based on score. Maybe that's better, maybe that's worse, I don't know, but I think it would be give us a little more guidance.
No, it's fair. It's like, does this organization do its own fundraising? Like, do we fund another program? It's all legitimate. Is there a best practice through that you've seen other municipalities that we could just adopt the matrix for scoring of these grants?
We can have a look, your worship, but in most cases, this is just the political will of council, to be perfectly blunt. I think
That's fair.
Councillor Hurdle's idea is fantastic. If we can come up with a fair system that we can say, here's where it goes. But I think, there's different things we can look at this. And what you might be able to do is, if we have the committee, we can maybe bring it forward at our next meeting or November, is we could even meet pre-Christmas just to see if we can come up with some type of matrix before we get into discussions in the new year. Wouldn't have to take really long. I mean, it's as hard and as easy as we want to make it. The only other thing too, Councillor Bennett did bring up about Kerry rideshare service, that, just so you know, we didn't put anything in. They didn't get any money this year from us. Council had approved, I think, in early August. We went back to them and they said, no, we reached out to them. They never really got back to us. We said, well, here's what's offered. What can you do? And they never really I think they were thrown off because it was so late in the summer and stuff, but it was a significant ask last year and we didn't know if it should be included in the budget this year. If you want to think about continuing that starting that partnership, maybe we'll say, but it would be better to have the discussion now and then start working for it through the spring. But if you don't, that's fine too. I just wanted to, because it was brought up and it's a good point to bring up, is if you want to revisit that, it'd be better to have it now so we can start the discussions over the winter.
For that one, council, through a budget that will soon pass the Regional Service Commission, we are giving the money for regional transportation. My recommendation would be that if they're unsuccessful, then we ask for those funds back for a program like this. Because we're already increasing our tax base to pay for transportation because of the way that that budget is. And what Hollis told us in his presentation is we don't use that money. So we'll have a pretty good idea. We'll have a pretty good idea, I would say, by the time peak tourism season comes again, if they're successful at getting that grant or have any momentum in the funding. And if they have none, then we ask for the funds back.
And the only thing, your worship, to throw back at you was, Neighborhood Works had given a presentation earlier in the year and it's kind of said what you ever could do would be appreciated. So staff threw in $3,000 because I think we talked about $10,000 over a certain amount of time. It's just for discussion purposes, but there was no formal application this fall, but it's just because they'd made an application looking for assistance, and council at the time had given us instruction that they were interested in at least having the discussion about it. So we added it to this version of the budget. And it could be thrown in with the other bucket.
All right, council. So in the essence of time, I think we really need to just get direction on how we're going to handle this. There's going to be no right or wrong answer. They're all going to be wrong, unfortunately. I don't think you're very comfortable doing that as a work session for a staff meeting. Is that safe to say?
If council wants to, it wouldn't be my recommendation, but if council wants to do it, then that's fine.
But we would bring forward, we would not approve anything. We'd bring everything forward to a council meeting for debate on the issue, but it would help set, like a committee meeting, help set what the amounts are for everybody. And then even if it's $0, we would make that decision as part of that regular council meeting. So council, how many would prefer to go that way about it? Yeah, okay. So we'll have a staff working session. No decision will be made. It'll be made by a formal motion of council and debated at that time.
So, but back to budget preparation, how much am I putting in the bucket?
So can we do that very quickly? When's the next staff? Can we do this next staff meeting?
No. Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's November, I guess, November 9th. Or something like that. Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
I'd rather,
November 12th.
12th. Yeah,
I'd
that's
rather
fine.
I'd rather do that than just guess what it is right now, because I'll be setting out an arbitrary number. If you need a placeholder, put $50,000 and we can argue it then. Does that make sense for everybody? It was 40,000 roughly. So let's just set it for 50 and then I think what comes out of that session is really going to determine. I'm just picking a number, random number out of the sky, just so you know that's fairly close to what it was. Realizing that there is some increases here. That work for you, Mr. Spear?
Yep. And something I did add was we have some funds in the operating reserves, and I thought maybe to help, if council wants to entertain, to help offset some of the increases, that we bring $20,000 in to the 2025 budget. It's not really earmarked, so that's on page 9. And so that's new income. If you look, not to keep making you jump around, but on those pages I gave you, I gave an estimate on the next page of where the reserve funds are going to be. This one here. It's on the back side of the first page. In general operating at the end of last year had about $195,000. That's just a suggestion. It could be more, could be less, but it's just to help minimize that needed from taxes. So we'll jump over to page, it's for the fire department. So page 11. And really, there's nothing major here. It's just to see, get your feel that the fire chief had asked for, and this is going back to our first presentation back on September 25th. That there's some increases, the repairs and maintenance for the fleet was increased by $5,000. Then the big one was stipends was increased by 30% from 10 to 13, but realizing we haven't done anything for increase in stipends for years.
Council, this might not be popular. I'm actually going to put out there that we should consider increasing that by 50%. It's not a big number. It's not a big number for how many hours those people spend. I sign those checks. They're peanuts for how many hours. When we were talking about, because of municipal reform, our own pay, I was kind of big on figuring that out. We said, let's park that and let's treat that as a separate issue. Well, this is my opportunity to be vocal. They're not doing it for the money, but the amount of hours and the fact that more and more they're beating ambulance New Brunswick to calls and some of the situations they get into, it's a positive message for a council to say that we know that. And I know I'm squeezing pennies. I can't have it both ways, but there's one thing that I would like to say is that we appreciate, and during that forest fire, I appreciate everything that all those individuals did. And this is a group that I can lobby for right now. This would be my opportunity, but it's not a big item compared to some we're spending. I think they're worth every penny to increase that from 13,000, take it right up to $20,000 is my opinion at that point. But council, over to you. And by the way, we're looking for new members. Yeah, think about it. This is a small incentive and a small way to say thank you to them for their efforts over the last few years. Over to you, council.
I would support that.
And I'll support it too.
So can we make that adjustment, Mr. Spear? Thank you, council. I think that, just a quick show of hands consensus. I saw a couple people say, yeah, that's unanimous. So, thank you to the fire department. Appreciate it. I just said 50%. So I just roughly, it's not great math, but I said 20,000. Does that make sense? 20,000, go from 13 to 20. Thank you, council, for that.
Might be leaving other local departments and coming up to serve our department, eh, Councillor Neal? I know what the things they're doing.
Again, how much they work, what they get paid. It would
No,
it's the right,
it's the
gas
right
money.
thing to do, but it's just many of the
Some of
departments
the
are
checks
rather
I
luxury.
write, I guarantee you would just offset their gas money going to and from that fire department.
All right, so next to Public Works, really the big ticket item in Public Works is the request to add an additional person to the Public Works fleet. That we've said there's just a whole bunch of extra projects we're doing now, mostly related to events. And the big one, of course, was during the last 2 or 3 weeks, they had Indulge, which took a lot. They had the Oktoberfest, which took, Indulge almost took a week. Then, of course, the raising the banners, was all good stuff, all important, but they're getting overrun. This year they're gonna have money left over in their asphalt budget because they couldn't get to it. Ditching, I'd say, is only at about 20% of what they should be doing on an annual basis because they're being distracted from other things. For other things, they're being allocated other things. So I think it's a good investment for the town, but back to you, council.
Mr. Spear, can you just clarify how many current full-time public works we have?
5 plus the public works superintendent, or not Terry, but Nate. The other thing is, though, to remind you is that what we're proposing is to remove one of the half positions that are in seasonal. So now we have 2 people that two half full-time equivalents for a mow crew. We're willing to drop one of them and convert them to a full-time equivalent. So it's really half a salary we're looking for, a little more than half when you throw in benefits, but
Thank you.
So sorry, those are the 2 arena attendants? Is that what that was?
no,
That's 2 additional.
2 additional.
Okay.
So it would have been, if you know them, Alex and Alex.
Yeah. Councilor Heenan?
So here I am asking a dumb question. So it means we're looking for half of a person, like a half of a full-time person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's gonna convert a half a position into a full-time position.
Yes, but
essentially.
we're already paying this person half right
Correct.
now, so it would just require another half to bring it to full time.
But it
Okay.
would be an advertised position, just so you know, it isn't. it's
Yeah.
not- That's not guaranteed that any of the existing people would
No.
get it. It's just,
Mm.
it'd be a full competition
Okay.
if it's approved by council.
Well, I think, my opinion is yes, but that's just one. Anyway, thanks.
Can I ask a question? Okay, you're saying it's a half person. So we hire, if it doesn't go to the half person we already have, does that mean we lose that half a person?
Not entirely. So Alex, so we have two Alexes. One of them was a student. And so we only, it went unfilled this year, one of the half positions. And so Alex McLean just graduated this year, filled in only for a few months instead of the 6 months. And so the person, the other Alex would likely stay here. And then would create the funding that was set aside for the other half position and convert it to a full-time position.
Just on the positions, when you get into public works, salaries and wages, it's going from a 431,969 budget to a 606. It's a 40% increase. Is that a formulation error by chance?
I don't think it is. I forgot to bring my computer. I did double check that because I noticed it when I was going through it a few weeks ago, but I'll just go have a double check to see what's caused that. It might be that we're allocating more of Mr. Acton's wages to that department now directly, but I'll have to go and see.
Okay, because that one,
It's possible it's an error, but I gotta go investigate it because I noticed that earlier too when I was going through it, and I proofed it. I remember that much.
and then, yeah, okay. Let's dive into that because that's a 40% increase. There's gotta be something else that wasn't there before that's now in there, like.
Yep,
Like I
yep.
get, the example I get is the Regional Service Commission, the tourism's way up because it was 50% allocated to recreation before, so it could be a transfer and it's at one column. to the other.
Oh, your worship, I can see what's going on already. If you look at it compared to last year, that the 2024 budget, we have salaries and wages and benefits and workers health all
Oh, you
separated.
lumped it
And
together.
we lumped it together.
That
That's
makes
all.
sense.
So, sorry, what page are you on?
Sorry, page 13.
So essentially what that would do is put it to 510. And then you've got that extra half position plus some wage cost.
Increases and stuff, yeah.
That makes more sense. Thank you for that.
So I just want to make a comment about our public works, and I don't know if other municipalities are in the same position as ours, but we are fortunate to have an electrician on our public works as well as potentially a mechanic.
A mechanic, yeah.
A mechanic.
Yeah.
So we don't charge out a lot of that work. We're able to do it in-house, correct? And I'll speak in terms of the Age Friendly, when the Age Friendly was providing funds to have some renovations to the youth center. We were able to do most, if not all, that work in-house because of the flexibility of our public works staff. So number one, they had the skills to be able to do it. And we have a team that shifts and moves to what is needed. And I think they do an incredible job in supporting all of this town. I'm very supportive of increasing that 0.5 position. I know we are in challenging times. I also know that we don't know what's coming down the pipe with us with a new government. I have tremendous hopes that municipalities are finally going to get a bit of a break from our new Liberal government, provincial government. But irregardless, I think this department has been working really on a shoestring. And they have supported this town in increased events. And I know that an argument has been made, you know, do we say no to events or to requests to support events? But that's what makes this town alive and thriving and growing. So if we want a thriving, growing town, we have to have the infrastructure to support the town. And in St. Andrews, that's our Public Works Department. So I'm very supportive of it. Thank you.
Councillor Heenan?
Yes, your worship. I'm very supportive, as I told you already. When I look at the steps that were built out at the Bayside Hall by our town, what that would cost if we had to send that out equals a lot of money. And I feel that they do an exceptional job. They're ready to do anything at any time. And I feel that, you can't ride a good horse to death. So my point is, it's like trying to get more help for them is what we need. We also have 42 units coming online at the 1st of November and December, which will bring in I was speaking about 75 more people to the town. So I do feel that having the additional help would be very well needed. Thank you.
Okay, Council, okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I agree with Councillor Heenan and Councillor Harland. Our Public Works Department are fantastic. They do help out with every event. I mean, Canada Day is an exception where they are above and beyond, and with everything they're above and beyond. The next day you wouldn't know we had an event because Public Works moves everything out of the way, and it's fantastic. The same with the one-way street. When it was gone, it was gone. And, just fantastic. They work very hard. They're very friendly. They're our first ambassadors. When people see them, they talk to them and they chit chat and they, build up the town. So I really think our supporting them with half a person is important. And I vote for, yes, definitely help them out
Okay.
because they help us out a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Appreciate those words. Just a quick show of hands. Who's good with the extra half position then? Because that's ultimately what this started all as. Yeah, okay. So majority. So you can leave that in, Mr. Spear. Next one.
Probably the next discussion, your worship, is on page 14, really, of the Ross Museum. It's just the only big ticket item kind of in there is that during the pandemic for 3 or 4 years, we stopped the Christmas, the open house. And it does cost the taxpayers or the town about $5,000 or $6,000 to do that, mostly because we have to leave staff there from Thanksgiving through to clean up, remove items, put them back, all that stuff. We opened it up again in honor of the 200th anniversary of Chestnut Hall. And so they're going to be doing it this year, and they're all excited. And the people that participate are excited. They filled up. The decorators are coming in, bang, bang, bang. Volunteers, and even there's some people that have been there since it started 20 years ago that have picked up, to help lead the charge. So I just want to get your feeling if you want to continue that. The deficit has been growing there primarily because the earnings have gone down. That, speaking of shoestrings, that budget's or that museum's run about as low cost as we can. There might be a bigger discussion with the passing of Carrie Kress, who brought a lot of knowledge on that what the future of that will be and what direction should go in managing it and stuff. But I think that's at a future time. But it would be just good to know if you're okay to kind of just bump up last year's budget on inflation. That assumes that we'll continue the Christmas open house or not.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I think the Christmas celebration is part of our town, and it's been greatly done by Carrie and Margot Sackett, who did it before. That really is almost like a Hallmark card when you see it decorated and the people that volunteer to be inside, as well as the cookies that you get. So my vote is that, yes, we keep the Christmas tradition going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Other members of council? This year, obviously, it's going to happen. It's in the budget. It's a anniversary year. That was when we debated why we wanted to bring it back for this year. I think even when COVID was done, we said we'll hold off and do it the anniversary year. I just question that primarily it's the school kids that visit that. Is that not correct? It's almost 80% to 90% the school kids. Is that safe to say?
I guess I really don't know, but when you go into the evenings, the school kids come through the day. And when you go through the evenings or the Saturday morning, there's always a steady stream. I'm not talking thousands, but probably hundreds.
You're so through your worship, I think the last time it was hosted, if I remember my numbers correctly, it was about 900 people, including school kids that went through. And there's a lot of school classes that are lined up and registering for this, so we'll have busy during the day, but anticipating that they'll be busy through the evening as well. So there's a lot of, from what we've heard and just putting it out to the community groups and organizations, there's a lot of positive support for it, and we'll probably see a pretty busy.
So I know it's not
few
just
days
our
of it.
school, there's buses that come from other schools, like
Right.
Deer Island Elementary was there and things like that.
Some of them try to make a day of it where they'll rent the ice, they'll do that and and that's something else we're offering out to the schools is if you would come for the day, experience the Ross and then have a little rental or something that gets the kids on the ice using it and it keeps them in our community for the day.
It also should be noted that with the Christmas committee taking a much stronger role in the last 2 or 3 years, they're able to promote it a little better and might be able to draw more people to it, make it part of, because before the Christmas celebrations really were bookended by 2 events, the parade in 1 week and the lighting of the Christmas tree in the other. So
Yeah,
started, but
Escape
now it's
Santa's
2 to
a
3,
big
it's
one,
2 to
yeah.
3 week celebration. So it'll draw more people to the town and during that time.
The only thing I will say, council, if you didn't do it for 2025, it would give you free up some funds for that outdoor classroom presentation we also received, where they're looking for funds for that to help our local schools. So I'm just saying, one pocket can go into another. Not saying to cancel it. I wouldn't be that person. I've already been negative enough tonight on certain issues. Council, but I'll be looking for just some consensus. How many would like to keep I keep say keep the Christmas going at the Ross? It's such an unfair question. How many would like to continue to have the budget the same as it was this past year? Obviously with the inflationary adjustments, I guess would be the best way to say. Quick show of hands. Okay, so I'm just saying leave it as is. It is important to note that it'd be great if they kept attendance though, just to see exactly what the numbers are. We haven't done it for a few years. Let's see what it is this year. And I will say that Christmas in St. Andrews from a tourism perspective is definitely growing. So it's becoming a little bit more of an economic driver.
Yeah, thank you. If we've flipped over to page 17, I guess it's the second half of the Parks and Recreation Facilities. So we bumped up the tennis court repairs. As you know, we've had discussions about that they're needing a little bit more love. I just wanted to mention for Councillor Bennett's sake that that when you said you'd done the visual inspection, I just let you know that Public Works had actually gone up that week. 2 guys had spent the whole week on their hands and knees filling in their cracks and painting over. So if you think of it, come in March or April when they open them up again, because it's usually a 2-year process. We have to do that to see the damage. But if we're not going to do the major repairs,
I
just say that increase that.
I think the $3,000 budget is very reasonable
Yeah.
and versus pay. Was it, how much was it? 600?
650.
Yeah, as long as it's playable and
Yeah.
if visually it does appear that's playable, then the 3,000, if we need to spend more time keeping this going, like, I think that its useful life still has a little bit more time left.
The equipment maintenance, we did bump up it's only $1,000 more than we put it last budget. But just to bring it to your notice that it's changed. The big item under recreation and program, so this is our recreational director's budget, is he'd like to increase Canada Day by another $5,000. We've been at that 25 for several years, and he's actually said the extra 5,000 would probably go mostly to the fire department's fireworks because they keep going up and we don't give them much any more of a budget to bring them up. So he thinks that'd be worth doing. The consultant, I just want to touch base on the consultant. I made it in the notes. It's just we've been a little slow get going on the recreation master plan. So that's really not new money. That's probably the cost for this year is going to be 20,000, and that the second half will be 20,000. So it's just really a carryover. It's not new money. And so more money. Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, I think now that I think of it, I think that $20,000 I mentioned before coming from the operating reserve fund was for that. That's what I was thinking. See, two accountants, just like twins. We'll have to look at our Zamboni. I think people heard last week our Zamboni was out for a day and they had to do some MacGyvering, if you know what I mean, for anyone who watched that show from the 80s and 90s. There's going to be
I'm
some.
too young, Mr. Spear.
I understand. It's too bad. It's a fantastic show. But anyway, that might go up a little higher. We bumped it up, but it might even go up a little more. We'll have to look. But it's working together and we'll have the parts in next week to keep it going for this winter. And so maybe it's going to have to go through like a minor overhaul underneath to get it working. But that's really out of there is about the only thing. Everything else, your worship, is really just minor increases. And I would recommend that before we get into the general capital fund, maybe we call it a night, but it's up to council. It's at 8:30.
We didn't want to stay the night. Just on,
It's too much fun for one evening to
Page-
give any more. It might be.
Counselor Ware and you, it's December. Just a quick one on page 17. So that, wages that's the temporary, the part-time person, is it? 56 to 74. Didn't we talk about an extra rec position? At one point? Wasn't that something that we talked about?
I think for the day camps, we might have increased half position.
But so when it came to recreation, we had a lengthy conversation. And there was half a public works position that was kind of, part of the reason was obviously this, but weren't we talking about another recreation assistant or something like that? Do I remember like a part-time or something? Am I just making that up?
You're just making that up.
Oh, perfect. So that 56 to 74, that is for the summer camp, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It was going to be over budget for this year, but most of it's going to be offset by revenue, that they're increasing the number of spaces and the cost of the summer camp. People were very happy with it, and those that were paying said they could pay more for the
Yeah.
programming offered to be competitive with other programs of similar note around the county. So both would offset that cost.
That's great to hear that's exactly how you grow a department right there. So if there's revenue associated with it, it's good news. Thanks. I just wanted to read that number because of the adjustment. So council, oh, go ahead, Councilor.
Sorry, we have a way to support any families who aren't able to pay for summer camp, do we?
We talked about it. Nothing really came up. There's no situation that we know that came up. I will mention that Debbie offered something through the days as well at the youth center for those that couldn't. It was different programming.
Okay.
It wasn't quite the same, but they still had opportunities to do things and lower levels of less experiences because of the difference in the costing, but there's still opportunities for youth who are interested to go over there and spend the afternoons and do activities with her as well.
Sorry, so Debbie's the one that obviously knows this list for the day camps. So yeah, Debbie also knows that if there's any circumstances like that, she can go to Mrs. Flamer.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, we brought that up all along and nothing ever came to our attention, but that doesn't mean there wasn't some quiet donations that paid for kids.
I'll give you an example. There's a kid that needed winter boots and she goes to Mrs. Flamer. So there's a lot of that good news stories that happen behind the scenes.
Not something we can bring up at a council meeting, but if there is a need, we should have a way of getting it known in the community, because there's always some of us that are willing to contribute money to things like that.
That's as easy as almost a social media post nowadays. We're looking for a kid to sponsor, and the Kevin Simmons of the world, I'll put him, you'll find a way to get it done. But I will say that we are very fortunate in this community. There was a kid that soccer dues were too much. Talked to Mark Peters. It wasn't an issue anymore. And that's what makes this a special community. And if anyone ever needs anything like that, staff and council would love to find a solution because if you can pay, you should pay. It costs stuff. But if you're not in a situation where you're not able to, as hard as it is, it would be really good to come to a Debbie Lord and we'll figure it out.
And probably that informal route's easier than having a program in place. I agree with you 100%. That it's good, but the town's worked well just with people willing, like yourself, like you said, or others that are willing to help out, throw in whatever, $50 or $100 to help a child make a program. There's enough there without going through a formal process. It can take time.
Counselor Heenan.
I'd just like to mention though, that where we have a lot of transient folks that come in to work in this town, a lot of them really participate in the town activities, especially the people who teach at NBCC, who come from outlying areas. They're fully supportive of the initiatives here in the town of St. Andrews. So there's a special group out there that do a lot of work that are not St. Andrews residents, and I would like to personally thank them because they fit in their community that they work in. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Just a
Right.
couple of things, Your Worship.
Yeah, sure.
Just really quick. So the last page of this little paperwork I gave is how much I think is going to be the tourism accommodation levy at the end of this year. Don't think I made any mistakes, but I just did it it was before I came into the meeting. So just so you know that that level of funding is potentially there. And the other things escaped me. Oh, yes, I just wanted to mention, just so you know, too, for the day camps, they actually got a lot of participants where there were parents down vacationing in the area, that the kids came just for the week instead of hanging at the campground or at the hotel pool. They actually preferred to come here and join in there. And there, there's probably 2 or 3 a week that went that week as well. So it's not just for the local kids, but it's been an economic driver as well that may bring people back in the future, knowing their kids can have a offsetting thing and the parents can dump them, I guess.
So just on the camps there, council, as well, it was a slow uptake to start because people were hesitant to know what was going to be the program. Now that they know what the established programs are, we are already anticipating that we'll probably have a full booking this year. So we're at least 160 spots that are going to be available, if not more. So.
Quick one just on since we touched on the tourism development fund. I don't think the camera rebate program should come out of that. That isn't tourism related. I think we're gonna need to find that within our own budget. I don't, we have cameras because of locals, unfortunately.
No, I don't disagree. Just I was trying to remember the meeting you had about it and I thought it was mentioned, but I'd agree.
Yeah, we
that's
can,
the wrong
I
fund.
wouldn't take it out of there for sure. We want to make sure that fund's being used. I will say that since there's an estimated year-end balance there, we talked about a visioning exercise for Market Square. That's very tourist related, so I don't know if we're gonna get a consultant on that, but that's, with that amount of fund, I think that would be a worthwhile thing for council to debate and consider. Was it your idea to have the visioning exercise? Yeah, it was.
And actually, Paul reminded me, I actually already have that built in. I glossed over a little bit tonight. We talked about it in the first round of operations, but we actually have that in our.
Can we transfer that over to there? I just think that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's a main tourism gathering spot asset of our community.
Yeah.
Mr. Spear, you're gonna like based on the operations standpoint, you're gonna roll that up and see where that nets out. Is that what percentage that is? And then we talk about, do we have to cut further? Because we're trying to get 3%.
It's still the capital, Your Worship. We should go through there, although that'll help tremendously because after all said and done, whatever's left over goes into funding towards capital anyway. So that basically is your mill rate. Future
Okay.
mill rates could be affected by debt you take on to do your capital, but we're getting pretty close there, but we can't ignore, I think we've got to go through the capital in a little more detail for the general capital side. We don't have to get it to a fine tooth comb, but I think there's a lot of projects there that are, what do you think of them types of projects that could be eliminated?
So is that the next step then, the capital projects?
Yeah, and it's really up to council. We were tentatively scheduled to meet Wednesday night. We probably aren't that big of a hurry. I would recommend that hopefully early next week, or mid next week, we'll get the numbers from the province. Something I didn't adjust here too, I've got to go back and look, was after Hollis's meeting, they redid the budget there and that might lower it some too. I couldn't find it just before I came here. So maybe the Wednesday after no, I said the week after. So like the 9th.
Probably
Or sorry.
council on Monday next week. You're probably looking at the 13th.
Maybe the 13th be our next meeting.
Is it possible, so based on the capital projects you brought forward, I think you and Mr. Knopper both said that this is not necessarily what we're gonna do. You knew that we couldn't do all those projects. Is that a safe assumption to say?
Yeah.
What was very, very beneficial is when Mr. Acton, yourself and staff sat down and said, these are actually what has to happen, and the rest, these are ones that we don't want to defer, but we could defer. Because in fairness to council, Mr. Acton and yourself know a lot more about what has to happen next year than what probably anyone at this table does.
And if you look, your worship, on the capital that's on the back, we've got those rated already.
You do it, but we can't do all the A's, right? Are the A's, is that what I heard? I think I heard that when we went through it the first time, that we're gonna have to make some tough decisions. I was just wondering if staff could go through that to say, these are ones we really wanted, but we understand we can't do them all. That exercise we've done in the past.
Yeah.
That was such a benefit for council. I'd rather staff tells us which ones go ahead and which ones don't, that deal with it on a day-to-day basis than, and no disrespect, council. When I was in your chair, I'm still in your chair, I guess, but staff understands this a lot to a higher level than we do. They live it.
Yes, we can.
Thanks. I put it on you so I can just blame you, right?
I don't face an election in 2026.
All right, council. Anything else before I go to the next agenda, which is just new business? There's nothing there, but anything else? Okay. Question period. Anything from the audience? Thank you for being here. No? Perfect. Sounds like we're off the hook. Councilors' comments. I know this isn't a regular meeting. Anything council would like to add? Deputy Mayor? Council Bennett? Deputy Mayor? Either or?
Thank you, your worship and council. Excuse me. I would like to make note of a very important situation that's happened for our community. For those of you probably saw on Facebook, our friends at CHCO were granted educational television by our outgoing premier and his council, which means that now everybody in the province of New Brunswick that receives a TV signal can watch CHCO on a local station in their community all across the province. So that's a really big deal for CHCO, having province-wide access to all TV watchers. And I'd like to congratulate them. I know it took a lot of hard work for them to get that designation, and it's going to mean a lot for them as they build their brand in the future. So congratulations to all the staff at CHCO. Thank you.
Good news. Good announcement. Thank you, Councilor Bennett. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, your worship. The last weekend, they had the first annual powwow ever in St. John, and it was fabulous. A lot of dancing, a lot of explanations, a lot of drumming. It was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it, and kudos to the people who organized it and did it. Donna Augustine was one of the elders there, and she's been here several times. And many of the singers were great. They had over a lot of vendors there as well. So it was a fabulous weekend, and I was very honored to be there and to see all the activity that was going on both days. It was fabulous. The second thing I have to announce is I have not forgotten about the drumming workshop or the rattles. We are having it on November the 16th, contrary to my Catholic friends who are all having the Catholic sale on that day. But we are having it that day, and Greg is going to come. We're going to do 20 drums in the morning and 20 rattles in the afternoon. And I'm going to post this on our website through our staff, Paul Knopper, and the prices will be there. So if you want to participate, you need to, I'm going to probably do it through myself so I know exactly who's coming and who's involved. So I'm very honored to have the drum keeper, Greg Mansfield, to come and do that, and we'll be assisting him. So it will be an all-day workshop. So it'll go from 9 to 12 for the drums, and then from 1 till probably 4 in the afternoon. I don't think it'll take that long, but they need to dry and whatnot. There's a lot of process. So if you're interested, check out our online page, right, Paul? And it will give you the prices, and then you can sign up through me. I'll put my numbers there, and we'll do it on November the 16th all day long. So hopefully I will see a lot of you there. As I say, 20 in the morning and 20 in the afternoon is probably all we can handle right now. So that being said, we might have another workshop if there's that much of an interest. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just for myself, just wanted to say that Tyler Van Gulpen's been in my thoughts all day. It's 3 years ago that we lost him today. So I want to give him a shout out before I look for a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Akaji, Councillor Gumashell by an inch over Councillor Heenan. Yours was higher, but his was a little quicker. All in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Thank you, council. It's a lot of conversations, and thank you, staff. Appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thanks, Andrew.